Are you looking for valuable business advice to reach that 7-figure revenue mark? Do you want actionable tips to properly navigate through every business challenge you encounter along the way? Let Tersh Blissett and Josh Crouch be your guide in getting you to the top here at Service Business Mastery. Tune in as they sit down with world-renowned authors in business, leadership, and personal growth who share valuable insights about management, marketing, pricing, human resources, and so much more. Let their nuggets of wisdom gold guide you in owning a thriving, profitable, and ever-growing business. Here are your hosts, Tersh and Josh.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast world. I hope you're having a wonderful day. You are listening to or watching the Service Business Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Tersh Blissett, and sitting alongside me virtually is my co-host, Josh Crouch. And then we have Miss Meredith Bell on the show with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about communication. And, communication as a male, that's one of my strong points. I'm just kidding. Everyone knows if you've talked to me very much, I can talk, but I have challenges in other areas when it comes to communication. So I'm excited to have Miss Meredith on the show today. And but before we get started, I want to ask a question really fast of you, Miss Meredith. Just think real hard, deep and hard thought here. Try not to make it too much of a doozy for you, but what would, like, just thinking back, like, just deep thought here. Think about like something that's orange and sounds like a parrot. What would you say that is?
Orange and sounds like a parrot. I give up.
A carrot.
A carrot.
Oh, welcome to the show, Ms. Meredith.
Geez, Tersh, where'd you get that from?
I would not have come up with carrot, I have to admit.
Oh man, you're welcome. So,
good morning, everybody.
It's 9:00 Eastern time, a little earlier for you, Josh. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, Miss Meredith, and your background and what makes you an expert.
My company is called Performance Support Systems, and my two business partners and I have worked together for 30 years. So that ought to be encouraging to your listeners right there. It's unusual to find people that really enjoy working together for that long. And originally, we were doing training in companies around leadership and team building. So communication skills have always been a passion of ours. And the reason is because it's fundamental to everything. We unfortunately don't have it taught in schools. You know, a lot of parents do the best they can, but they didn't grow up really learning how to be effective listeners, how to give feedback in a way that was constructive and really helpful to someone. And so we all kind of do the best we can, but the result is there's a lot of pain and suffering at homes and in the workplace around people not connecting very well with each other because there's so many things that get in the way of communicating. So we have just been on this drive for years to help improve that in the workplace. And we've written software programs, we've written articles, and just recently have published this book, Connect with Your Team, about the top 10 communication skills to really help people understand, there are some simple steps you can follow. It doesn't have to be complicated. And it just takes practice over time to really get good at them. And I think when people understand there are some basic steps, it becomes less intimidating. And so my expertise comes from practicing and applying these skills myself over the years. And I'm not perfect at it either. And that's why our subtitle is Mastering the Top 10 Communication Skills, because it's really a lifetime of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. The fact that you incorporated the mastering portion of it, because as we grow and then we accelerate, and then we, launch, grow, accelerate, and then, eventually become a master in something. It's something that you constantly have to work towards in order to master. And it's one of those things, sorry, excuse me. It's one of those things where it's, you have to work at it every single day. And, I'll ask you this: do you feel like it's a skill that can be lost if you don't work at it every day, or once you've attained a certain level, you're pretty much there?
Oh, I love that question. Like any skill, think about riding a bike or playing tennis or golf or whatever sport you might enjoy. If it's been a while since you played it, you're rusty. And yet you've got this wiring, that physical wiring that happens in the brain when you've connected the dots, so to speak, and you formed this skill over time. It's still there, but you have to kind of brush up on it. And so you don't totally lose it, but it's like any other skill. Practicing or playing a musical instrument is the same way. You've learned some things and they can come back to you, but it stays fresher and you stay honed in on your skill. I would imagine it's that way with any of the technical aspects of your work. Someone that has learned how to, repair a particular piece of equipment knows how to do that, but they may need a refresher if it's been a while since they've done it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The one of the things that, it leads me back to, you mentioned riding a bicycle and playing sports, playing soccer. I played soccer my whole life. My kids got into soccer and I quit playing. And then I'd play with them in the field, and it's like, wow, this is stuff that I could do. I could do some of this stuff before, and now I'm struggling to do it. I'm right there with you. I think during the entire 2020 of just being so pulled away from people, like just working remote's been great. We've been remote before, like we mentioned before in the show. We've always been remote, but we still had a lot of interaction with people. But 2020 really pulled us away from having that interaction with people, and the communication style really changed a lot. And then we went back into physically seeing each other and being in the same location again and having to communicate with people. And it's like, wow, like I really got accustomed to having this conversation over Zoom, and I have ADD real bad. So it's great for me to sit here because I have little fidget things that I can mess with and still interact and have a conversation. But when I do those same things in person now, it's like, you paying attention to me? And I'm like, yeah, I've taken in every single thing that you've said. And they're like, I don't think you have. And it's like like our whole world has changed. Have you seen, since writing the book and having all of that come out, did 2020 change anything in the perspective of the way you think about communicating?
It's interesting. It depends on really what transpired for people before 2020 happened. For example, my two business partners and I have each worked remotely from our homes for over 10 years. And so I've been used to Zoom calls and, phone calls. And so that's been my way of being and operating. So for me, it wasn't a big adjustment. I have been used to paying attention to, tone of voice and other cues with not being in the room with an individual. I think it was a bigger adjustment for folks that were used to that in-person contact. And especially those that really thrive on those interpersonal interactions, it was sort of like a withdrawal. And that has been much more painful for folks like that. I think, though, that I remember one fellow, because I have a podcast myself, one of the things he did when the pandemic hit is he made a commitment every month to just reach out and call a bunch of people that were in his network just to say, I'm thinking of you. How are you doing in the midst of all this? And that connecting with them by voice was a really important aspect of keeping the relationship going. So I think that's the creative question everybody can ask is, given these circumstances, what can I do to strengthen my relationship with someone? Because really, that's what it comes down to. It's all about relationships. For the business owners who are your listeners, whether that's their employees, their clients, potential clients, or vendors they work with, all of those individuals, they need to have a good relationship with them. So the question is, how can I build and maintain a strong relationship so that for employees, they want to keep working with us and working for my company? And for those others, how can I help them feel so appreciated that they can't wait to tell others about us? That's sort of the question that should drive everything that we do, whether it's in person or virtual.
I feel like and I'm in digital marketing, so everything has shifted. I mean, it was already shifting, right? The paradigm was going towards digital, but it like completely accelerated. Some people even suggest that like it accelerated like 4 or 5 years faster than it would have normally, just because we had nothing to do instead of sit in front of our computer and our phones and move things digitally. I find that now that I know the world events are again changing and things are ramping back up, but there's supposed to be in-person events and stuff like that. And if you're someone like me, like I'm actually sitting here right now and my leg, I have a bouncy leg. Like when I talk to people, you can't see it on camera. And my kids always ask me like, why are you always moving? And it's just like that, those social cues, like every time I'm doing something, I'm just like, I don't know if my mind is just racing or something. I'm always like moving some part of my body. But I don't know if you have, because I'm sure there are other people like me out there that have social cues, especially in person, where I try to like keep them under the table. But I don't know if you have like any sort of exercises or anything that would help just kind of calm someone like me down that just can't stop moving and can't stop fidgeting with stuff, kind of like Tersh.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's one of the things is just raising your own awareness. So you realize that's something you're doing. And if you're concerned that it's going to be distracting for the other person, then thinking about what's the impact or, what's the impression I want to create here. If something that you're doing, whether it's fidgeting with your hands or kicking your leg out or, that kind of thing, if that's going to cause someone to stop talking to you and it's going to interfere with their ability to either talk or listen with you, then it's worth just practicing keeping it still. Even if when you're by yourself, want to set a timer so that every so often you ask yourself, hey, am I moving my leg now? What am I doing that might cause a distraction for this person? Because I think it's all in the overall, kind of under the umbrella of what things can I say or do that help this person feel valued by me? And what is it I may be doing that's getting in the way of that? And so it may be that, moving your leg is not a big issue at all, or having something in your hand, especially if you let people know, I've got this kind of unusual mannerism, just ignore it. You can bring it out, and talk about it if you feel like you are concerned that that's going to be an issue for communication. I think that's the thing to look at.
If there's the elephant in the room, just be like, hey,
yeah,
let's address the elephant in the room here.
That's right. That's right. And Tersh, in your case, if there's some something that you like to, hold, they used to call them, or they still do have these worry beads and things, that people have, and just say, my hands just get fidgety. And so I need something in my hands. So just kind of overlook the fact that I've got my hands, I'm tuned in to you, but using this allows me to actually tune in better.
Yeah.
So just,
with stuff like that, we have at our house one of those those little black boxes that's got what is it, like a cube, and it's got all the little stuff on it. I'm like, business ideas. Why didn't I come up with that? That's such a brilliant business idea, and I'm sure that person is super rich right now. Meredith, you mentioned listening and relationships, and without kind of segueing you too easily, do you want to go over, you have a top 10 list in a book that people can read, but do you want to go over maybe the top one or two things that you find are the biggest problems for people when it comes to their communication and improving their communication skills?
Sure. I think a key thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about is this whole aspect of listening, because we don't learn to do this well. And if you ask most people, are you a good listener? They'll say, oh, yeah.
Huh?
And yet,
what did you say?
What did you say?
And yet, when you watch them, in practice, most of us are guilty of waiting, letting the other person talk long enough till we can feel like we can jump in and get our turn. Or worse, we interrupt because we think we think we know what somebody's going to say. We're in a hurry. We don't want to let them finish because we want to move on with it. Mm-hmm. The problem is for the other person, they feel disrespected. Yeah. Because they're not being allowed the opportunity to really say what they want to say. And if you jump in too quickly with what you want to say, because very often if we monitor our thoughts, we are busy preparing a rebuttal or, a response to what somebody's saying, especially if we disagree with it. It's like, we got to make our case. And when we're in a sales situation with a potential client, that really works against us, because one of the things somebody is silently evaluating, whether they ever tell you or not, when you are trying to do business with someone, if they don't feel you're working to understand their problem, their issue, whether it's subconscious or conscious on their part, they're not going to choose you because they don't feel comfortable with you being willing to really listen and understand them.
Let me ask you this then. What about the awkward or potentially awkward pause while you're thinking after they say something? I mean, for me, if I don't think about what I'm going to say next, sometimes if I'm just absorbing everything that they're saying, and then I have this moment after the fact, I feel like there's that awkward, like, okay, what's your answer? Like, what's your response? Because I've been listening to you the whole time. So now we have this couple seconds, and 15 seconds will feel like 15 minutes. And so what do you say to that scenario?
I think that it's a real one, right? And I think a key element of that is, if we do take a moment to pause, we ourselves have to be comfortable with that. In fact, we can just acknowledge to the person, wow, you have brought up some really important points. And I want to just take a second to think about the best way to respond to them. Mm-hmm. Again, just being open and honest with them and say, I just need a minute to process what you just said. I don't have a ready answer for that. Yeah. That kind of thing. The other piece of that, Tersh, is the opposite, where you ask someone a question and you are uncomfortable with their silence. And when that happens, we often jump in too soon, right? So we have to be comfortable on both sides, because when we are asking someone a question that really does require them to think about it, then we have to respect the fact that they need it maybe 15 seconds, maybe longer to process it. And we're much better off just getting comfortable with the silence and just say to ourselves, I'm patient. I'm willing to wait for their answer. Because when you do that, you're much more likely to get an honest response from them because you haven't made assumptions. See, that's where we get into trouble. We have these stories in our heads that we tell ourselves about somebody, about what they're going to expect. We anticipate this and that. We get this whole scenario worked out in our brains without checking it out with them to see if we're even accurate. And so it's just really important to be willing to ask questions as a part of listening. And I want to clarify something too. Listening doesn't mean sitting there silently and passively. It's an interactive process. And that's why it's so hard, because you've got to really be present with that person and working to understand and really get what they're telling you. So that means paying attention to their body language if you've got the visual component to go by, if you're not on the phone. But if you're with them or you're on a Zoom call, pay attention to those little things, because they may say certain words, but the tone of voice, how they look when they say it, is conveying something very different. And so it's appropriate to recognize and bring up the disconnect that you're seeing. I noticed that you said everything's okay, but the way you said it just now indicates it's really not okay. So could you talk a little bit about that? Just throw out a question instead of making assumptions and then automatically jumping in with an answer that may or may not be where they were coming from at all. So asking questions to learn is a really important part of the listening process.
So one scenario kind of comes to mind. So like whenever, whenever my wife says, sure, that's fine, you can go fishing, she might not really mean that. And so
that's right. That's right. It's dangerous to take at face value what somebody says. And by the way, when you practice these communication skills, at work with these various important people in your business, it carries over at home too. Mm-hmm. And it makes a huge difference in the relationships at home. Just to acknowledge where somebody is a way of showing empathy and helping you. It's so easy to brush off. If a spouse or a child says, well, I wish somebody would help me with this, or I feel like I'm the only one doing this. And, our initial input might be, oh, quit complaining. Why do you complain? Instead of saying, it sounds like you're disappointed that nobody's chipping in and helping you. To let them know we're getting that emotion, that, negative feeling that they're expressing in that moment. Instead of judging it, just reflecting it back and acknowledging it, that often dissipates it so that it's no longer an issue. But as long as somebody feels like they're not being acknowledged, they're not being seen or heard, that's when you start seeing this, you might call it misbehavior in your kids. They're acting out because they're wanting that attention. Mm-hmm. And so what can I do to recognize where they are at this moment without putting them down? Yes. And that's true of an employee too. Think about a situation where an employee has made a mistake, mm-hmm. And it's not the first time they made the mistake.
Yeah.
Often the response is, how could you do that again? Right? Or something else that is critical and judgmental. And here's a really important communication tip. I'll give you some questions that you can ask that help a person process that mistake themselves. Because one of the things we are tempted to get into as leaders, as parents, is telling the person what they did wrong, mm-hmm. so that we save time. Learn. I want you to learn this. This is how you should have done it. And instead of guiding them to discover the answers, because the more time they spend figuring it out, it may seem like it takes longer, but in the long run, it saves you time because they get it imprinted in their brain better when they come up with the answers themselves. So let's just say that you have somebody that made a mistake. And so what you can start with is getting the facts. What happened? And how did you feel about it? So you kind of get at the left and the right brain. So you get their perception of the sequence of events, and then asking, okay, so why did it happen that way? What thoughts were going through your mind as you took these particular actions? What was your motivation? Sometimes somebody can be nervous because of who else is there with them, or, somebody may have said something that triggered a negative emotion and they just kind of lost track, or they lost control of their emotions. We don't know until we get them to think about the why. Mm-hmm. And then looking at the consequences. So, what was the outcome? How did it turn out? Did it turn out the way you wanted? Where was the shortfall between what you hoped for and what you actually got? So you're getting them to think about, okay, I didn't get the result I wanted. Where did I go wrong? Was there some shortfall in the training I got? Was there something that I simply forgot to do? This can be useful for you in helping them learn and others learn about that particular situation going forward. And so then getting them to think about, okay, so what would you do differently in the next situation? So what happened? Why? What was the outcome? And then what will you do in the future differently? Or if you encounter this situation again where you're not sure, what are your options? So you get them to think through. They're doing this proactive thinking in advance so that when they're in that situation, now they've got this memory to pull from because you've helped them think about it. And it's so much more effective when you are guiding them to learn rather than telling, directing, because it feels to them like correction. Mm-hmm. And think how you feel when someone is talking to you in a way that is making you wrong.
Right.
It never feels good.
Exactly.
It's like you get on the defensive almost immediately.
Exactly. And so if you can, acquire this skill of simply asking questions to help someone learn from their own mistakes, their own experiences, even the successes, so that they do the right thing in the future again, that has a lasting impact on them, and has an impact also on their attitude about their job, about their performance, their desire to do well, because they feel appreciated and respected. And I think that's a huge element of helping employees feel motivated and engaged in their work. I know that's an overused word, but valued, involved, committed to do their best.
No, I agree with that. I like that too. We had a couple other things that we wanted to talk about, but time's kind of slipped away because of the awesome content that you have just provided us with. But there's other things too that I'd really like to visit. Maybe we could have another show. You even have on there, resolving conflict creatively. And that's something that in a male dominated industry that becomes a challenge sometimes. And so I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe that you could just touch on that. And
I'd be glad to, because there's some simple things that I can share that'll be very useful.
Great.
And it's this: when somebody states very strongly, this is what I want, and then you also have something that you want, and they're two different things. And this is typically what you want to do, as opposed to just opinions that you have. Conflicts come around wanting to do different things. And if you can understand and maybe replace the word want with need, what is it behind this person's statement that they want this? What's driving that, in other words? And just, again, asking questions, not in a way that feels threatening to them. So you say, well, why on earth would you want that, right? that's going to put them again, like you were just saying, Josh, on the defensive, and instead to be genuinely curious. I think curious is one of the key words to think about when you sense a conflict. If you can switch from one C word of conflict to curious, it has a totally different feel to it. Because what you want to do when you're curious is learn more about something. So you want to learn more about what is it that's driving this person to want this. And so when you can identify what they need and then be willing to look yourself at what is it that's causing me to feel so strongly about this? What is my need? And I'll give you just a real quick example. When our daughter was in high school, she wanted to go to France with this French club that she was in and wanted us to pay for it. And of course, her father and I said, no. So we had her wanting us to pay, us saying no. And so we discussed it and said, all right, so this is where getting creative. That's another C word, curious and creative. Being willing to explore different possibilities that don't necessarily mean I'm giving in, okay, but collaborating. How can we come up with a solution that feels good to you and to me? And so what we ended up with was we were willing to pay for half if she would earn the money to pay for the other half. And then we looked at creative ways that she could earn that money at home, one of which was cooking meals for us. That was a real win for us because we could get home and she would have dinner ready. Well, that was worth something. That had real monetary value for us. So that's just an example of once you identify, okay, we want two different things. Is there a possibility to come up with something that works for both of us? I think that's the key. And where we get into trouble, Tersh, is our egos.
That's exactly
what I feel like we are losing if we go anywhere but where we stated initially that we want to go. And I think it's a growth. You can call it emotional intelligence, you can call it being mature, but this willingness to consider someone else's perspective and look at ways to meet their needs and ours is huge. And so when you're thinking about a customer that whose business you really want, just to ask them, what would make this a real win for you? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll come up with something that's totally, outrageous. And you just have to be honest and say, well, we can't go that far. Here's what we could do. And so just keeping an open mind, not feeling threatened, they're trying to get the best for themselves. And so how can we get the best for both of us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. What would you say if whenever you're asking these questions, you can't get to their why? Like, I know, like peeling an onion back and asking, layers, 7 layers deep, and that type of thought process. But what happens if they're just like, I don't know.
That's where the being willing to be silent and just say, okay, I'll just wait a minute because I know it's in there. And
they just don't want
and
to
it's
say
okay. What, Josh?
They just don't want to say it.
Part of the time, that's right. They may not feel safe. They may not be willing to see what your reaction might be. And to give them permission, I think, is really important. And just say, it seems, and just again, acknowledge that elephant in the room. It sounds like that you're not wanting to really be honest with me about this. Is there something, I've said that's caused you to hold back? Just ask in a very non-threatening way. But again, being curious and getting them to think, because it may be something subconscious that they're not even aware of.
I think
and you're helping them.
The thing that I struggle with here is the non-threatening way. And it's not that I intend to threaten anyone. It's that my demeanor comes across as a threatening way, or not really threatening, but I just hold everyone, especially within our business, to a very high standard. And whenever we start talking conflict, most of the times it's like, wow, you really let us down. And because I feel like we are very lay all the cards out there the entire time. Like everybody knows their KPIs and knows where they're at throughout the day. It's very easy for them to look up their own personal KPIs. whenever I ask the why question, it's like, well, we all know that it's not because you don't have resources. We know that it's, if you haven't reached this KPI or this, whatever, it's because there's been a challenge on your end. But if there's something that I can do to help, let me know. But if I do that, like, and everybody on our team knows that I'm very willing to like, oh, you need this tool in order to accomplish this task. Okay, I've got this tool. Here you go. Now, if you don't accomplish the task next time, I'm going to ask you why. And then it becomes this awkward, oh, it's kind of my fault, but we don't want to say it's my fault type thing. Or pass the buck. We've had a rash of people saying, well, it was so-and-so's fault because they didn't set up this properly, or so-and-so's fault because they didn't tell me about this in time. And so it becomes a pass the buck type scenario, and they all know that that's not my MO. I don't live in, I don't tolerate that type of communicate, like blame game type stuff. And so that becomes a challenge whenever we have those tough conversations. And we don't have them very often, but whenever they do come up, it seems like, oof, this is a tough challenge. And I don't like having those conversations. And so I really enjoyed what you said here about resolving this creatively, because I'll definitely use those in the future, because I'm very conflict adverse. Like I don't want to have that super crazy wild conversation. I'd much rather come at it just like you said and find out like what's their driving need, like why are you not able to complete this task. I like that thought process.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially when someone has been a good performer most of the time, we don't know until we ask. Maybe they had a real tragedy at home that has interfered with them being able to focus that particular day. We don't know. And by asking questions, you can get at the answer. One of the other chapters in the book that we don't have time to get into today is called Getting Buy-in for Expectations. Mm-hmm. And it's really all about setting agreements up front, about what the person will do. And so when you have a situation that is recurring, you thought you had gotten it addressed and resolved, and yet here it is popping up again. Mm-hmm. Doing that analysis with that person, again, to find out what caused the shortfall this time and what do they need. And I think you're handling it really well, Tersh, as far as asking questions, what resources do you need from me? Because we agree that you've got everything you need now, and this shouldn't happen again. So mm-hmm. What are you going to do if you find yourself facing a situation where this could happen, and get them to look at what do they think a realistic consequence should be if they don't meet that expectation, so that they're buying into it, in advance, and hopefully then preventing it from mm-hmm. happening again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like that. I'm definitely using it within our business for sure. Josh, do you have anything?
You mean besides like a page and a half of notes and things that I'm going to start using to implement in my own life? This is, it's funny because Tersh probably saw it already. I tagged my wife in the live feed because she will be the first, second, and third person to tell you that I am lacking sometimes in the listening department, which, like you mentioned earlier, just getting outside of my own way and realizing like, hey, I know I got like notifications going off like turn it off, turn it over, listen and engage in the conversation, and realize that stuff will be there at the end of the day when I have more time to do that. But those relationships are really what build our business, build our life at home and stuff like that.
That's so, and I think that's a good note to, kind of wrap up around. If we can consider the person in front of us as the most important person in our world at that moment, and give them our full attention. That means turning off all those other kinds of distractions and notifications, because what message are we sending to the person? How can we, and this is a question, each one of us needs to ask ourselves, how can I make this person feel really valued at this moment? And giving them our full attention and demonstrating we really are listening to get what it is they're trying to tell us is huge in terms of strengthening a relationship. Because if you have a spouse who's saying, you never listened to me, that's a little flag going off. Could be yellow or red, depending on how many times they've said it. But we take for granted sometimes the people who are closest to us. And they're the ones that need us to really show how much we value them, because they're the ones that are really there for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And most of the time she's right anyways. So if I would just listen in the first place, I wouldn't have had that problem.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you, Meredith Bell, for coming on the show and sharing so much with us and sharing so much with our audience. If you're listening to this or watching this, in our show notes, we'll put the same information in there, but go to growstrongleaders.com /SBM for Service Business Mastery. And then also pick up your copy of Miss Meredith's book, and it's called Connect with Your Teams, Mastering the Top 10 Communication Skills. And I have my copy of it here. There's a lot of data in here. There's a lot of information in here. And that, you don't have just 10 topics to talk on. I mean, there's more than that in the book. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all your information with us, Miss Meredith.
Thank you for having me, Tersh. It was great talking with you and Josh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Meredith.
Absolutely. And so if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, our team, and visit us on the website too, servicebusinessmastery.com. And we have a lot of show notes there. Also, our past episodes. But don't forget, Service Emperor, Relentless Digital, they're both chipping in huge by allowing us, myself and Josh, to step away for the day and really work on podcasting. So if you have any questions about digital marketing, that aspect of it, reach out to Josh and his team. And then if you're in Savannah area and you want to know more about air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, any of that services that we have, reach out to us. So with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful and safe day until we talk again next time on the Service Business Mastery Podcast. It is a podcast focused on service business owners, managers, and technicians who are considering becoming business owners themselves. Until we talk again next week, be safe. See you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Service Business Mastery. Now that you are equipped with essential business advice from this impactful conversation, you are one step closer to becoming the successful owner of your dreams. If this episode has been helpful to your business journey, don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a rating, and share it with other owners as well. Visit servicebusinessmastery.com to learn more.